Hello and welcome back. In this section we're going to round off our look at how we show trends using graphs and charts in Excel 2010. And I'm going to start with an example showing stock prices based on US dollars over a period of time of just over a year. Now if you look at the data, it's in two columns. The first column has the date and the second column has the stock price. And if I look at the dates column, you'll see that first of all that the dates are in UK notation, so it's day, then month, then year. And secondly, you'll see that although they're basically about a month apart, there are some big gaps, so we leap from April to November there, and sometimes the gap isn't really a month. We've got one from the 3rd of November from the 20th to the 27th of December. So let me select my data, create a default chart with Alt F1. Then I'm going to enlarge that chart a bit as usual, and what you can see is that it's made a pretty good attempt at an initial chart, as you would expect it to do, but the irregularities in the dates mean that the chart itself has columns that are not evenly spaced, which is exactly how it should be, of course. Now there are a couple of very important things to recognize here, because particularly in relation to showing trends in Excel 2010, there is a very fundamental difference between a horizontal axis that is based on date and a horizontal axis that is based on text. If you look at the horizontal axis here for my stock prices, you'll see that Excel 2010 has actually created an axis for me. It's actually made the interval one calendar month, so it starts at the 25th of September 2009, goes through to the 25th of December 2010, and it has placed the columns accordingly on that date scale. Now let's go back to the previous example that we looked at, which is quarterly sales of iPods. And in this case, although Excel 2010 appeared to be treating these as quarters, in fact it wasn't treating these as dates at all. It has no real idea that these are dates. It just treats them as text. They're really just names. They're items with names. There's an item called Q1 2002. There's another one called Q3 2002, and so on. So Excel 2010 does not recognize that these are dates, even though it has done the trend processing as though they are. So it's important to recognize when you're dealing with any kind of date axis or scale in Excel 2010 whether Excel is actually treating it as a date or not. Now let's look at some of the differences that occur in this situation, and let's look at our quarterly sales of iPods again. And if I right click on the horizontal or category axis and click on Format Axis, Axis Options, interval between tick marks is 1. It's just one unit really, one of something, and then we can set distance from the axis and so on. But the important thing here is that the interval along the axis is 1 unit. Now let's go back to our prices. Do the same thing on the prices. Format Axis. What we get now under Axis Options is pretty much completely different, because Excel 2010 has recognized that we're dealing with dates here, and it's given us a minimum date for the horizontal axis of the 25th of September that we could change if we wanted to, so we could choose an earlier date or even a later date for that matter. It's given us a maximum date, again we could change that if we wanted to, and then on the axis it has selected major unit of 1 month, minor units of 1 month, and a base unit of a day. Now these have all been done automatically and you can manually change them, but it's important to recognize the difference here in terms of how Excel 2010 has interpreted our started data and created the chart. So let's stick with our stock price for the moment and let's see something else that we can do with trend lines. If I change the chart type for this chart to line, something we've done before, and then click on Add Trend Line, we've already seen that there are a number of options for the type of trend line, and we did a moving average for the iPod sales figures. For these figures I'm going to choose polynomial as my trend line type, and you can have second up to sixth order polynomial. I'm going to choose a third order polynomial, and with polynomial chosen you can actually use Excel 2010's built-in ability to predict, to forecast future values. So given that my figures here went from late September 2009 virtually to the end of 2010, let's suppose I want to try to predict that same stock price for a couple of months. Now my base unit, as we saw just now, is a day, so 2 months will be about 60 days. Choose polynomial, third order. Trend line name I can change if I want to. I'm going to change it to price forecast, and I'm going to go forward 60 periods. That's 2 months basically. Click on close. Let's see what happens. Now what you can see first of all is that the line has been extended beyond the actual data, which is the blue line there, but also when Excel 2010 extended the line, it also extended the labeling on the axis by adding 2 more months worth of labels on there. And I've now got a forecast for this particular stock price based on a third order polynomial forecast up until about the end of February 2011, which I know by the time you see this is going to be in the past, but you get the general idea. It'd be interesting to actually see what happened to that stock price over that period. So that's a first look at the forecasting capabilities within Excel 2010. Now in terms of now formatting the rest of this chart, we've seen things like changing labels, legends, title and so on. One thing we haven't looked at so far is the right hand axis, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to basically undo the trend line and I'm going to put the chart back to the column form. Now one of the most effective ways to mislead people with a graph or chart is to change the vertical axis, and sometimes you might use this to your advantage, sometimes you have to do it for practical reasons. In this particular case we're showing a stock price which has basically been priced just over $1. It's gone up to about 1.3 at its highest, and because the price variation hasn't been very great, the movement at the top of the bars is not very significant. If you wanted to show that this stock price was very steady, a presentation like this actually makes it look quite steady. If you wanted to show that it was varying quite a lot, that it was either increasing greatly or for that matter decreasing greatly, what you would do is to change that vertical scale. Now if I go to the vertical scale, right click, click on Format Axis, note again that Excel 2010 has automatically assigned minimum, maximum, major unit and minor unit values. If I change the minimum to fixed, and instead of the chart starting at $0, supposing I started it at 0.8, now watch what happens. the whole chart appearance is greatly changed by the fact that it appears to vary very markedly over the period we're looking at. And if you wanted to basically present this as a price that was increasing well, that sort of value would really help your argument. And in fact, go back into format axis again and change that fixed to $1, close, and you have an even more markedly growing price. So let's now return to our iPod sales spreadsheet and have a look at that again from the point of view of dates versus text. Now, as we saw before, Excel 2010 does not treat these values as quarter dates. In fact, it treats them as straightforward text. So if you wanted to properly interpret this data as dates, you would need to convert these to dates. And with quarters, there are a number of ways of doing it. I'm going to use what is, I think, a particularly straightforward way in this case. First of all, I'm going to insert another column. And quarter dates basically begin the beginnings of January, April, July and October. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to replace that first entry, Q1 2002, with a date of the 1st of January 2002. That denotes the beginning of the quarter. Now I can immediately see that Excel has treated it as a date because it's put the zeros in for me. And if I now select to the bottom of the data area and then on the Home tab click on Series in the editing group, and I want a series in columns with dates growing 3 months at a time, click on OK, and it fills down with all the dates for the starts of my quarters. If I then select back up to the top again, Alt F1 for the default chart, and in fact I can straight away check if I right click and go into format axis, I can see straight away that Excel 2010 is now treating my horizontal axis as a date axis. So it's put in axis options, minimum 1st of January 2002, maximum 1st of October 2010, and it's put in major and minor units that aren't particularly helpful, but I'll sort those out in a short while. Let's just make the chart area bigger, a little bit easier to work with. Okay. Now, I've still got exactly the same data I had before. I can go through all the same formatting options that I did before. The advantage now is that these are actually being treated as dates. If I don't like this particular notation, it doesn't say quarter anywhere, I could actually do some formatting. One very simple way of reformatting this, if I were to change the axis to do as major units fixed, say 1 years, and the minor axis fixed at 3 months, I'd have markers corresponding to quarters, so that's a good start. And then if I go back into format axis again, this time choose number and custom setting, and for my custom setting, let's see if I've already got one set up. I have. Choose just the year number. I now see that on my horizontal axis I just have the year numbers, which may be enough for me considering the message that I want to give. Now these are currently aligned with the beginning of each year. I could actually move these along and align them, say, with the center of each year by changing the start point on the horizontal axis. And as I said earlier, I can change the scale vertically, title and so on. And I can then put in trend line, do forecasting, putting a moving average and so on. So if you need to convert something which is text into date. This is one kind of approach. There are various other approaches. You can use functions like the Excel date value function, various other sorts of string handling functions to convert variables that are meant to be dates but don't actually look like them into dates. Okay, so that's it on showing trends using Excel 2010 charts and graphs. In the next section we're going to start looking at comparisons using Excel 2010. I'll see you then.